the whole point of today is to show what we've done and talk about it and think, what have we done? And what happens next? And what can we say together about Fluid Earth and the way we're thinking about that? Because there are many different strands to that theme. I wrote some notes somewhere and I've forgotten what they were, but anyway, just there are many different strands to do with flexibility of all kinds. We on purpose gave the title that was ambiguous and could lead in different directions, and indeed that's exactly what the artists have done. We've had a discussion, actually mostly Bridget and I online, about growth recently. And my sort of, to cut a long story short, my concluding line was governments and politicians should stop talking about growth. And who's already done that? Artists and creative people, because we always get there first. So we'll come up with something really significant today, I'm sure. Just some housekeeping. Any smokers and vapors, go out on the quay. It's a lovely day, enjoy the view. There's a loo downstairs. The breaks will be in the downstairs room. And, oh, the other thing to say, it's important, if you've left anything valuable in the downstairs room, don't, because the doors are open. I don't think there's a history of theft here, but you never know. Anyway, so keep all your valuables with you. So I think that's probably all I'm going to say now. So we're going to have talks and discussion. We haven't organised this time to have groups discussion, but if it turns out during the day that seems like a good idea and you want to turn and discuss with each other and then feedback, we'll do that. But say that during a discussion period. But at the moment, I hope there's enough time for everyone to chip in and have their say. So, one person who has been fundamentally important throughout the residency programs, which is now the 5th year, and the most inspiring, a very, very inspiring speaker, because we have several around here in the room with us. But I can say that of Tim because he wasn't with us this year, because he had had an accident and was incapacitated by it. But here he is, ready to address us. And actually, he did recommend one of the programs for our watery day, splashing through the Babingley River, which was a highlight. We're going to hear a low light about that later. Oh no, a highlight. The Babingley River continues a good story. Yeah, it's other ones that we're going to hear low stories about. Anyway, Tim, over to you.
Well, thank you for that fulsome introduction. I see a number of faces I recognise and some I don't, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to lead the residency field trip this year. Anyway, I think Fluid Earth is an absolutely beautiful theme, and it's been fascinating to see how this year's residency has interpreted it. We're going to shortly hear from Rebecca Hurl, Sue Brinkhurst and Liz Ballard on this very fertile theme. Now, we all know about the Earth as the blue ball. We've seen pictures of it from space. And I guess it was the uncanny creativity in water molecules coupled with electricity and a variety of mineral compounds, which is thought to have produced the first amino acids and made life possible on our planet. Water is the medium for the chemical reactions in our cells, and it is essential to life. The force that through the green fuse drives the flower is a watery one. Well, much as we may adore water, we also know that our water environment is abused, from the groundwater in aquifers to the surface waters in our rivers. Unsustainable demand shrinks what is available, at the same time as percolating pollutants infect it. Runoff from roads, farms, buildings and industries carries pollutants into streams and rivers, so the watery arteries of our landscape are compromised. And authorities in charge of them too often shrug or look the other way. Only the propensity of swollen rivers to burst their banks and ravage settlements seems to compel people's attention. Water only seems to come to the fore when there's a shortage or a surfeit. In fact, over the past decade, we're becoming aware of it as never before. And it's not just because people are furious about sewage discharges. We are beginning to value it. Now, philosophers have always been attracted to water. It's a subject for profound meditations. Its flowing nature is a metaphor for change and becoming. Nothing is constant but change. All is flux, as Heraclitus said. One cannot descend twice into the same river, as he says in his fragment 91. For Heraclitus, what gives structure to the flow of change and becoming is the logos, meaning the word or order. As an earth heritage worker, I try to understand the interactions between water, that ubiquitous fluid mineral, and geology, the geologos, the logos of rocks and minerals in the landscape. Water shapes the land, which sets the stage for life. Now, taking Heraclitus at his word, we discover that we are not nouns, but verbs. We are not beings, but being. Nouns have a metaphysical effect which needs explaining. They create a discontinuous world of differentiated things. Verbs, on the other hand, are reflections of a world in process. We are doings, breathings, paintings, cookings, telephonings, dancings, etc. We are what we do. We are process in action and part of the fluid universe. So, each of us verbs in our own unique way. A geranium, geraniums, putting forth odorous velvety leaves and red flowers. It can only ever do what's in its nature to do, in its capacity as verb. A Veronica, Veronicas, putting forth the GroundWork Gallery project and asking artistic questions. Each of us in our lives spells ourselves out in the world. Each artist spells themselves out into the intersubjective flow of life, and their work may meet everything from appreciative applause, lukewarm assent, or even indifference. Our indifference to someone's art spells out a lack of personal correlation. The work of the most effective artists conjures up powerful correlation, whether it be among institutions, such as Michelangelo did with the Vatican, or among our private thoughts, dreams and fantasies today. I respond best to works which correlate with my own processes. But before we put our feet into the creative river flows of Rebecca, Sue and Liz, I would like you to feed your mind with some storied images of the fluid earth. Well, rain falls, snow falls, and lies on saturated surfaces like this field at Billingford. Water then soaks into the ground and flows through networks of natural soil pipes and field drains into ditches and ponds. This is a ditch at Long Stratton. The water flows on its way to the sea, or perhaps it is recycled as water vapour and makes clouds and mist before it ever gets there. Here are some clouds at Hoxton. But do clouds truly exist? I'll leave you that question to ponder. Chalk is an important aquifer, and springs well up from it, like the Inglehead Springs at Sherborne we see here. Springs cause bogs, ponds and fens to swell with water and streams to flow like the Heacham River. The Lady Well at Sedgeford feeds this valley, just as the Springhead Complex at Flitcham Abbey feeds the river Babingley. Subterranean waters reach the surface when water levels rise in the chalk aquifers, as at Hillington Chalk Pit. However, over-abstraction may stem flows at their source, as happened at Spring Head Meadow at Flitcham, after a water company pumping works was installed in the 1960s just in the headwaters. Water hosts intimate chemical reactions between dissolved minerals and bacteria at Ling Common Ditch. Brown ferrihydrite is precipitated, making a gloriously sticky brown pigment, and dead ferrooxidans bacteria leave rainbow patterns on the surface. We all need drinking water. It comes from water company boreholes and private wells like Gimmingham Hall Farm. Lime-rich water in the cattle drinker at Instead Hall Farm, Weybred, supports a wild population of stonewort algae. After we've finished with it, water is polluted with our waste and needs to be treated. But how effectively does this happen? Inglesthorpe Sewage Works was discharging clear water when I visited it, but what pollutants are dissolved or suspended in the water? Earth is unique in having oceans of liquid water on its surface, creation of the primordial Hadean Earth and icy incoming comets. Seas now rise and fall with the tides, responding to ineluctable lunar fluxes. Sandbanks at the mouth of the Ore estuary at Shingle Street, we see here, are covered and uncovered by these fluxes. Meanwhile, a rainstorm tracks off out into the North Sea, the sea which has existed for some 4.4 billion years at least. Coastal waters create rhythmic forms as they interact with fluidized sedimentary material. Flotsam is sorted on Titchwell Beach, while complex ripples develop on sand flats at wells next to the sea. Living things need water to survive. We're about 60% water, but some beings, like the slime mold Fuligo septica, are more than 90% water. We mammals grow our babies in waters, just like our amphibian ancestors have done for the past 350 million years. Hardy plants, such as the rock samphire on Bigbury Cliff, can survive in adverse environments, provided they have enough fresh water. Well, some people say that water molecules have memory. Meeting here today, we're exploring new pleasures and we will be laying down new memories. So let the party begin, and may I now hand you over to Rebecca, Sue and Liz.
Thank you, Tim, for being so inspiring as ever. We're going to come back during the general discussion. We'll come back. So think about things you also want to ask Tim. Rebecca actually wasn't a resident this time, but was last time. So is returning to talk to us about the wash.
Okay. So this is the piece. Thank you. Fleet Lynn Creek washes that I made for the 2024 GroundWork residency. It tells the story of the various forms of water that we encountered on the research week, and I want to retell that story now, reading from my work as I go. Lynn, that's L-I-N-N, Lynn, as in King's Lynn, originates from the word Lynn, meaning estuarine lake. On the edges of this lake, people gathered to produce salt by heating the salt-rich mud. It's thought that the cooked earth spoil, the salten mounds, raised the land above the surrounding marsh to form a dry site that became the town. When the tide is very high in the ooze, I stand on the riverbank looking across the water and imagine the Lynn has returned. I have become entangled in water. I have floated works upon it and submerged pieces in it. Looking at Michelle Wood's etching of Blakeney Spit in the gallery, I remembered that I have deposited a votive offering, a copper mezzotint plate, into one of the creeks. It should still be there. That act was part of a work called Immersion, where I considered how water invites me to join with it, and at the same time, how it scares me. My practice is often intimately focused on the salt marsh landscape of the Wash, in particular the stretch between the outfalls of the River Nene and the Great Ouse. I love its wide open space. The marsh can appear to be a grassy expanse, but when you step out onto it, only then do you realise the grass was concealing an inch of water and that your boots leak. Washes. I survey the intertidal zone, the grasses that are stirred by both sea and wind. I listen to the birds and I feel the vastness of the world. The water forms a unique landscape in a give and take motion with the land. Land should feel like a certainty, reliable underfoot, but these washes are aptly named, the sea covering them twice a day. The tide, imperceptible, insidious, fills the creeks and the channels, moves across the mud and percolates through the grasses. It's both land and sea. It's beautiful and dangerous. For the last 6 years, I've been researching how I combine my body with landscape through the process of seeing with, being with, and making with. For the GroundWork residency, I plan to get to know with my body somewhere different. However, on the research week, we visited numerous sites in Norfolk, several of which were new to me or made new by gaining new insight, and it became apparent the creative force of water in this landscape. So one of the places we visited was Palm Paper, where I noticed this drain on the floor. It was surrounded by a paper sludge. And through this, draining water had cut these distinctive channels, and it struck me how those tracks echoed perfectly the creeks cut through the salt marsh only a mile or so away. And I looked up to see the Great Ouse running past the factory window, about to flow past those very creeks. And I recalled hearing a scientist speak on the radio about how water always acts the same way at whatever scale. So a tsunami at sea and a tsunami created in a wave tank are functionally the same. Hence the similarity between drain water in the factory and water draining into the river. And I began to reflect on the various forms of water we were encountering, and I decided to focus on water and its centrality in our lives and our histories together. I considered the Purfleet, which is next to the gallery, and its place in the town's history. A painting on display in Lynn Museum by Henry Baines shows this river being used. People are in it, climbing down to it, overlooking it. Fleet. The Purfleet, once Lynn's main dock, flowed to the Ouse from the Gaywood River. Now kept permanently at high tide with closed sluice gates, is home to ducks and bulrushes, and in hot summers, diving children. In the past, it's moored tall ships, acted as an open sewer, and been choked with rubbish, holding shopping trolleys in a muddy embrace. Attempting to follow the route of the river using a town map from 1830, I find it disappears under the High Street, the river now shut away underground. I decided to use the image of the drain for my work. I drew and redrew it several times to concentrate on the parts that spoke to me most about how water acts. I then marked out sections from the main drawing and redrew these onto lino, each one standing for a different type of water. Creek. An aerial view of this landscape, particularly one taken in the driest summers, will reveal in crop marks the routes that water has taken. That distinctive meander and jink that water makes as it finds its lowest, easiest path. On a hot summer's day, I see, in a meadow, the dark green spikes of sedge amongst the browning columns of grasses, and I know that here is water. Hidden maybe, but here nonetheless. I always knew I wanted to combine any imagery with text, even before I decided to use the drain image for the whole work. I planned to revisit all the sites and draw and write in situ, but circumstances beyond my control meant that that didn't happen, apart from my attempt to follow the route of the Purfleet. Using text within a work offers me the chance to speak directly to the viewer and to tell them a story. Telling a story is my main interest as far as an audience for my work is concerned. I hope people take my experiences and apply them to themselves, to go out and discover green-blue places for themselves. Writing also allowed me to go to a place, the aquifer, that was beyond reach. I read about it in Angular Waters reports and in geological text, but I wanted to go underground and flow through the chalk with the water. By writing about it, I could do it. Aquifer. The River Stiffkey, re-meandered, once more overflows onto its floodplain, the water filtering down to feed the aquifer. The chalk, exposed in Hunstanton's red and white cliff face, dips below ground, formed of long-dead protective calcium carbonate shells of coccolithospores, tiny planktonic algal nanofossils. Deep underground, these chalk catacombs flow with water. I wonder, does this hidden groundwater make a noise? I imagine the soft plinking sounds heard when I'm submerged in the deep end of an otherwise deserted swimming pool. Writing allows me to introduce public history and personal experience. Actually, I'm not certain of all my facts. Information gleaned from Tim and Nick on the research week may have become corrupted in my head, but then it becomes experiential knowledge alongside the physical interactions and emotional responses to water that I am describing. Those physical interactions are important because that's how we come to be entangled with any green-blue space. Marsh, a point of zero energy, but fabulously rich, adorned with sea lavender, interspersed with sea purslane. Open patches of water studded with samphire spheres reflect the hazy clouds and cobalt sky. I stand and stare. Merleau-Ponty described the act of perception as taking what we perceive into ourselves. He said that on seeing blue or red, it filled his body and he vibrated with it. We are a phenomenal body, and it's through our bodies that we come to know. This is the wonder of water, because you can interact with it completely. You can dip your fingers and bless yourself with it, as Louis Niels Font invites us to do. You can drink it, wade into it, immerse yourself completely. You can look at the surface or look into at the alternate world within. Histories and storytelling are also key to entanglement. Having experiences, reflecting on them, embeds them into our person. It's another form of connection, another taking into our bodies. In extrapolating from the image of the drain many different occurrences of water, Fleet Lynn Creek washes is not about seeing the world in a grain of sand, to misquote my fellow printmaker William Blake, but about recognising grains of sand, water's presence everywhere. Sea. Does everything start or end with sea? The action of the waves at home are wearing away the forest. Trees are tumbled onto the beach where lumps of peat, remnants of a drowned forest, are warrened by piddock shells. Pioneer species, prickly saltwort and sea rocket create micro-environments. Soil accrues, a dune system begins. Between the rat line and the waves, I dig away the sand, finding shells and pebbles. The sand and water swell through my fingers. Thank you. Shall I take my seat?
Yes, thank you, wonderful. We're going to have a whole discussion to the end of this. Thank you very much.
Hi. Okay, I wanted to start just with a little bit about me. And my practice is led by materials and process, and I work within the environment. And more recently, I have focused my attention on the tidal River Old, which is where I live in Suffolk. Each work is a response to this landscape, asking how art might reframe our way of looking and deepen our awareness of the places we inhabit, finding beauty in nature as it shifts through history and under the pressures of climate change. So I'm working with flooded plains, saline wood, and reeds and mud. We need conversations about our relationship with the environment. There's an urgency to protect it, and by connecting, we can rebuild empathy. During this residency, as those of you who have done previous residencies will know, we visited between 2 and 4 different sites each day and listened to many knowledgeable people speak about local history, urban soil pollution, coastal erosion, chalk streams, and even folklore. A magnificent organisational feat by Veronica. Thank you very much. Taking part, I naturally thought I would continue with my preoccupation with river environments, and so would therefore focus on Norfolk's many chalk streams to find their sources, their rhythm, their spirits. But it was our visit to Trimmingham that really stayed with me. There we met Sue Grime, a member of the Coastwise team who work with communities where the coast is eroding. She spoke about the very real and ongoing erosion that is happening along the Norfolk coast and how some communities are preparing to relocate as the sea continues its steady encroachment. My process of making is repetitive and reflective. It forms a cycle that folds time back on itself and becomes less about representation and more an invitation to pause and enter the circular rhythms that shape both land and self. The first work I made, Acts of Erosion, was filmed on Hunstanton Beach. We went there on a warm, sunny day. The beach was full of walkers and fossil hunters who rummaged under the cliff chalks, just as they had done for centuries. Thrilled when after a storm or a high tide, a freshly exposed section of the chalk face would reveal new finds. However, bit by bit, the cliff edge is moving inland. Already the footpath that ran along the top is closed to walkers. Danger signs give warning. Shown in slow motion, Acts of Erosion captures the steady, relentless rhythm of waves striking the shore, a visual echo of time, persistence, and decay. This simple, repeated act compresses centuries of loss into a single gesture, the breaking away of land into sea. It is both a lament and a witness. And hopefully we've got a clip here. And this goes on for several minutes, and the chalk gets ground down. Living in East Suffolk, I am familiar with coastal erosion, and of course Dunwich is a famous example of a Suffolk village lost to sea. Norfolk too has 10 known settlements that have disappeared beneath the waves over the past centuries. Yet what struck me most during this visit to Trimmingham was the immediacy of the issue. Decisions are being made right now about which communities will survive and which will be surrendered. These are choices shaped not only by geography, but also by finance, population, and policy. The stark truth is that not all of the coast can be saved. We heard how the village hall in Trimmingham has been relocated further inland, how schools and churches will need to be rebuilt. And there are already discussions taking place with the local community at Haysborough, where the graveyard is in immediate danger. The Norfolk Coastal Road will eventually be rerouted, and over the next 80 years, more than 1,000 residential and commercial properties could be lost to sea. The second piece of work I made, called Material Displacement, comprises of 12 chalk pieces taken from the broken chalk on Hunstanton Beach. Each piece represents the 12 most vulnerable sites along the Norfolk coast. Some of these names are already fading from the map: Haysborough, Overstrand, Munsley, all communities rich with history and identity, soon to be lost to the sea. The chalk segments embody this history. They are both a symbol of the coastline's fragility as well as a container for memories. When placed into silk pouches, they are transformed into artifacts, objects, preserved as though held within a museum collection. Yet beneath this local narrative lies a universal one. The human displacement along the coastline mirrors forced migrations occurring across the world, displacements born from conflict, climate, or environmental collapse. People are continually being uprooted from their homes and homelands. What do they take with them? What can fit into a small bag that will still hold the weight of their life before? What is the tangible essence of belonging? Perhaps it is a piece of the land beneath their feet that becomes the final token of identity and loss. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. You're welcome. Now, Liz Ballard.
Hi. So I'm an artist based in Norfolk, and so I have a long-standing connection with this local landscape, and water is quite a key material and inspiration in my practice. My work is often site-specific, interactive and temporal as well. I'm very interested in the resourceful and the communal aspects of sustainable water harvesting and exploring ways of bringing people together to highlight and celebrate our connection to water. I often work with ceramic and plaster and textiles, but these objects are very sort of resource heavy. So I've been trying to explore new ways of working that is less sort of damaging or extractive, to minimise the impact on the environment. So my work that I did during the Fluid Earth residency was sort of building on work that I'd done in a previous residency with Hellgate Pottery in Norwich, where I created a temporary fountain in the yard there. So I dug a pond and lined it with clay, and in the pottery napped or used napped flint to shape ceramic vessels around to decorate the pump. The work here referenced the cultural, social and natural heritage of the city as well. So in the corner you'll see a picture of another fountain, or what was called a shell garden, built in the 1870s by a flint napper called James Frewer. And I really loved this idea of having water and fountains as this opportunity to bring people together and really celebrate our connection to water in the city. So like many artists on this residency, I was really inspired by the chalk streams that we visited during the field visits, and especially the springs. The middle picture is a video. I don't know if it's gonna, oh yeah, there we go. So you can see the bubbling springs coming out here. So this is the visit that we did to Lady Well Springs near Sedgeford that Tim referenced earlier. I just found this a really special, almost magical space, where you see the groundwater emerging and feeding into the River Heacham. So Tim Snelling, who was our guide that day, was talking about this bubbling, almost like lava at the bottom of the bedrock, where the crystal clear water comes down. Also visiting other sort of sources of the river, so the springs at the River Babingley, which also is extremely a special time as well, and at Brinkhurst Staith, finding the spring on the coastal edge. Again, these magical little bubblings coming through, which have really sparked my imagination. when coming into this residency, I thought I would try and make a water feature that would sit alongside the river. But as we did these field visits, I became really aware that actually these are really beautiful, wonderful, thriving places that don't need me to come and put anything in them or do anything to them. Actually, what they need to be is just left alone, really. So it really sort of made me think about what I wanted to do, and actually almost signpost people to these very special places, and make room for nature rather than sort of physically impact it. And like Sue, other visits to sort of immense chalk white landscapes, so at Hunston Beach and the chalk quarry at Castle Acre, just thinking about these, how these landscapes are formed by both natural and man-made processes. So that was an inspiration, but also as a sort of colour palette, thinking about the textures and the materials to be used in my work. As well, many other visits around King's Lynn, Palm Paper, through the park, and going over to Norwich as well. So this picture of the pumping station as well, all sort of giving me inspiration, giving me, you know, the shapes, patterns, texture, but also thinking about the heritage and history of water management in this area. So as well, thinking about the social places as well, and going and sourcing materials, recycling materials. So going to Swaffham Market, going to car boot sales, being given pieces of natural materials from the quarry, as well as other things, sort of just looking around and being inspired to think about how I might create a sort of water feature using all these different materials. So this is some experimenting with some of these pieces that I found. Different objects, thinking about the bubbling springs, as well as the sort of the water table and the different levels within this landscape. So this is just some experimenting in the garden. Whilst doing this, again, thinking, initially wanting to have a work outside, but actually thinking that I didn't think it would be suitable for wildlife, so didn't want them to be sort of engaging with it. So instead decided to do a more indoor piece. So thinking about our relationship to water in the domestic space. So the final piece, the ladies' well assemblage, using a number of the natural found, as well as pieces that I'd previously made in ceramic, carefully balanced, really sort of almost squeezed together onto this table, highlighting this, you know, how do we make space for nature? How do we connect with nature? What is that sort of relationship to us in our everyday lives? So a key feature of this piece is obviously the water, which I went back to Ladies Well to collect. So thank you to Tim for letting me to do this. And yeah, that piece is now obviously in King's Lynn, in Veronica's GroundWork Gallery. It is a sort of thinking about the stillness and the movement of the water. So unfortunately I haven't got a film of this piece, but please, yeah, go and see it and take a moment out and listen. So thank you.
Thank Thank you very much. We'll have a chance at the end of the day, the gallery will be open. So now I'm going to hand over to Helen Lindsay, who was one of the residency co-hosts at Broomhill and Reefham. And ironically, both the artists she hosted couldn't be here, Rosa Whiteley and Shanshan Jiang, but you'll see their work at the end of the day. But Helen, can I pass to you?
Yes, sadly, I know Anne was, as Veronica said, due to come. One of the reasons it would have been great, if she had been able to come, was for you to see how she used the water, because she actually worked in the stream. And we've got some fantastic pictures of her in a camping chair with the water all around her and her work in front of her, and it's just wonderful. But anyway, so she saw the water sort of working through her work as she used ink on some paper that she floated. So it was they're great. But I'm sure we'll get a chance to look at that later. And Rosa, and Rosa of course did also some great things on the land, and it was great to have them both working really very much in the land. But I think this discussion, I'm going to read the question, is, so this first discussion is, how can we live in symbolic relationships with water? Who and what disrupts that? And what to do when the systems break down? So we're all thinking about processes and working with those processes, and as obviously has been described, you know, the processes are sort of changed by human activity, and sometimes that's wonderful and sometimes it isn't wonderful. So how can we engage with that? How can artists highlight those issues and create an atmosphere for discussion and change? I like Tim's question, you know, do clouds exist? Well, we could sort of kick off with that. I mean, my thoughts about that is they exist as a process, and, you know, a lot of us are thinking about process. So I don't know. Do you want to say anything about that idea, Tim? Well, you threw it out there into the room.
Come into being and out of being as we watch them, but the longer you study them, the more you see.
Talk into the microphone. You can move it round.
Expound the virtue of looking up at clouds and lying on your back and just watching them, and noticing that little gestures appear and then they disappear as well. And we call it a cloud, but actually it's more of a sort of a congregation of moisture and vapour, and which is in process. So thinking about what the presentations that we've had this morning, I was thinking there are actually, we're very much in process. There are narratives going on. People are telling us about their work. They're taking quotations from the landscape. They're taking bottles of water. They're taking lumps of material. So they're taking, as I say, quotations out, and they're also discoursing upon what they're on the meanings of it, and that is very much all part of a process awareness, I think.
B. Springwood, yeah. I'm an artist from Norwich. I was just trying to frame the question. There was something that was important about seeing those little videos, and I'm wondering for each of you, there's that issue, isn't there, about water. Water has a great stillness about it, and it has this amazing movement. And there was something about seeing the movement in the clips, even seeing the movement of the chalk, is very important to us. And it's quite an issue, I think, for us as visual artists. Like, we're looking at something in process, and we have to capture it in a moment, which then often becomes still. So I don't know if each of you can address that in some way, because I ponder and I worry about it in my work. Like I feel like I'm freezing something or I'm stopping something, but I don't always want to be making film. It's like, yeah, so what do you think about that? How do you feel about that?
Thank you for your question. Can I ask, what kind of artwork do you make? Is it a sort of static work?
Well, I mess about with lots of things. I make installations which sometimes move in the wind or or get moved, but often working with materials that are on site. But I also do collage and textiles, and I have done some film. I've sort of dropped out of doing that, but I'd like, because I think I'm puzzled about those issues, and also technology's gone past me. So yeah, it's that mixture of. I've always been concerned about that, trying to capture a moment in time or an experience in time, and what happens when we try and freeze something, or just to kind of capture a moment. Do we lose it? Can we do that?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and showing that sort of the time-based nature of materials as well. I think before doing sort of sculptures, I was doing watercolour paintings, and I really loved the kind of the qualities of just the water, actually. So I started freezing it into different sort of ice cube shapes with pigment, so then have sort of stretching or elongating that period when it's liquid, and then just setting it on the different sort of papers to see how it would melt and then sort of evaporate and leave a trace, leave a mark. So then you have a sort of a painting at the end of it, but you don't get to see the process. So I think that is an ongoing challenge. And these works, I think, using material, using water as a material in the actual piece is one way of getting around that problem. I don't know if the two of you sort of come across that.
Yes, it's difficult, isn't it, to capture that movement by a static image. But I think by going to the essence and the essence of what is happening is a way of doing that. I was fortunate to put a big show together at the Snake Maltings, which involved collecting a lot of river mud with the kind permission of the Crown Estate, I hasten to add, and taking it into a very small, confined space. And when it arrived in the exhibition, it was very wet and very sticky and full of smells and viscerous. And then gradually, as the exhibition continued, it oxidized and took on another form. So during the exhibition length, people were able to experience that difference in the water. So that's another way of maybe working and giving water a life to move. Yeah.
Can I just follow and ask Rebecca, because you did the opposite. You made very still images using, and actually inspired by bubbling water. Can you talk about how you came to that, and also whether the words are an important element in bringing the water to life as well?
So I think that the stillness is an illusion. The pieces I've made, so when I drew, there's movement, physical movement of my body when I'm drawing. When I'm cutting the lino, again, it's different, but there's a physical process there. And obviously when you print, you introduce the paper to the ink. But that's not the end of the piece. It now exists currently in my house. But what will happen to it in the future? So I've made images before, I've printed images onto paper, and then I've put them out in the wind, in the wash, for the wind to work on them and I've then, much later on, I showed the same piece in a leaky building in Norwich, and someone came and said, the work upstairs is all getting wet, and it's fine, it's fine. So I don't see the prints as being a still thing. I see the work as something that will happen to it. I don't know what will happen to it in the future, but it's an ongoing process. And where the writing comes into play, it just allows me to introduce things that I can't as yet visualize sometimes. Also, it allows me to have a bit of fun with discovering words like coccolithophores that I didn't know before, and stuff like that. But it's a way of revealing the inner thought process in the explicit piece of work.
So I'm interested in the question of living symbiotically with water, and I think we, of course, fundamentally do, but we're living in systems that abstract us from water in a biotic sense. So, you know, because of sanitation, we lose connection with water in relation to life, and maybe sanitation at a loss of sanctity. And we're also obsessed with hiding away from the weather, which is essentially interactions of water, but at the expense of protecting ourselves from the ravages of extreme weather. So it's almost as if our fears of being infected or affected by water have created an excessive abstraction from it. So I'm interested in how you engage in conversation with people about that, so we can be more mindful about what water is and why it matters. You know, how your work engages people in those ideas.
Does anyone have a comment? Neil, you look like
I'll just kick off with it. Narrative, I think, storytelling, emotion. Sometimes a drama, a story, a narrative can touch more closely than tables and numbers and figures and science. And so I think it's important that you have that dialogue. And I think as artists, we're quite well placed to be able to do that and open up that discussion and allow other people to make the connection. And through making connections, you become aware. And once you're aware, you know, the rain is only just another bit of water. It's nothing to be frightened of. I think you can engage with these elements a lot more easily.
I'm reminded of what we heard that Shan Shan had been immersing herself in the river. And of course, as I said earlier, we're 60% water. Now, we've been talking about boundaries and permeability. Obviously, one can get overwhelmed, and I think that's behind part of your question. And of course, the word whelm is an old Anglo-Saxon word which means flood. So we can get over-flooded, and how do we manage boundaries between ourselves and water and ourselves, our environment, and each other as well? So there's that theme of overwhelm or perhaps underwhelm.
Yeah, like Sue, I think the storytelling, but also very much about listening. And I think creating artworks and spaces for bringing people together to have these conversations, being reflective, but listening to people's experiences, sort of empowering them to do that. And I think, workshops or being quite playful, being quite silly, actually getting hands-on with different materials and having a go, talking whilst doing or something like that. But yeah, giving people a space to share their voice about their experiences.
Oh, sorry, Rebecca.
Yeah, I agree
sorry.
with both of what everyone said. It's about drawing attention to something and so other people recognise it. When I started my PhD research, I described the area of the Wash that I work with as a special place to me, and I started to go to conferences and the awkward tea time chats. People, oh, what do you do? I'm an artist researcher and I'm researching special places. And they would say, how do you do that? And I would describe the methodology. And then they would say, oh, I have a place. There's somewhere I go to. And it's by describing things and naming things. And that brings about the realization in other people that they are operating in the same way. So I'm hoping through my work to provoke people into thinking about these things and giving them the proper importance. So really it's about getting people to pay attention and to realise what they are paying attention to.
Can I also add that the work takes on a different life in the gallery, and that's where a lot of responses and conversations happen. And you've all introduced water in a new way to people, and I was particularly struck by you, Liz, saying you didn't want to make your work in nature because it wasn't compatible, but bringing water into a domestic environment. And people have been thinking about the flow of water and the sound and where does that come from and where is Ladywell and how does that relate. So there's a kind of poetry to what you're contributing and the way each of you have presented your work that people do respond to, and it always opens up new conversations. And I think that role is almost as important to think of how it's received and where, and it needn't be in the gallery, but a lot of crucial things do happen there, and communities are formed around that too.
So I completely get where you're coming from, and often that fixity of the print in that moment in time, but actually it doesn't, there's a whole process behind it and there's a whole process in front of it. You did mention you left a couple of mezzotint plates somewhere. Mm-hmm. Are you going to go and get it? When? And are you going to share what that looks like? Or maybe take some prints from it to kind of show us what has happened to it?
I've been asked this question before. I think the answer is no. I can't get it back now because I don't quite know where it is. I've repeated that experiment or act with a copper plate in one of the pools on the marsh near where I live, and I left it for a month and I had to dig it out of the mud. So this has been there a decade now, so I'm sure it's either long gone or very deep down. But I did print from it beforehand, which is slightly cheating. Mezzotint is a very labour-intensive process, so it took several weeks to rock the plate and then to burnish the plate and print the plate. But still, I could have used that copper again. It was the act of giving up something that I had worked hard at. But yeah, I would love to get it back and print from it, but I probably need a metal detector to do that.
That could be another project. Thank you.
I just wanted to say, I think Veronica's comment about spaces is really interesting. The spaces in which we have these conversations. I mean, obviously there's online and the variety of spaces online and the gallery, and they are very particular places in which art is known and understood, and people choose to come and have those conversations. And I suppose I'm asking the question, how can we move those conversations out of those spaces into something beyond what, out to other people, if you like. It's hard.
Thanks.
thanks. Yeah, so I'm trying to make notes of what everyone's saying. So what's ended up happening is I'm writing down some really wonderful words, and I just wanted to ask all of the panel, because you all kind of feel like wordsmiths as well, and I do quite enjoy that and the etymology of ideas and words and stuff. So I'm just wondering how important. Oh, sorry. How important words are to you around describing different types of water and different types of watery feelings, and what words are maybe special to you or come up over and over. Something around words anyway and language.
And can I request that you try and combine any answers with my question about spaces and where you use those words and who you're aiming them at? Thanks. If possible.
Words. I don't use words. I will think about words during my reflective research, often poetry, other forms of literature. But for me, it's the outcome and the image that hopefully will speak. As for your question of, how do we take that out? It is difficult. You can invite groups to come into gallery spaces. Often people find them quite intimidating. To actually sort of ferry them in, particularly school children, they can be very, very receptive, and that's something that they then take away with them and develop later, and of course workshops. But schools are under pressure. They don't have money. And so you have to be the one to create that opportunity for them and maybe, pay for that opportunity to happen. It's a difficult environment out there for that.
Also, so words, I find words quite difficult actually. So I think in my work, maybe it's all the senses. So it's the sounds, it's the sights, it's the textures, it's the feels. And going into different spaces, I think, as Sue said, gallery spaces can be extremely difficult for some people if they have no experience of going to galleries or museums and things like that. So going out to where people feel comfortable, where they go, every day with their families, at the weekend, down the high street or into the park or things like that. Maybe we should be setting up events or walks or talks or things like that in places where they are already going, and I think artists are really good at doing things like that. So like doing pub quizzes or something like that, or the city organising family fun days in the park. Maybe we should be doing things, as part of that. As part of my research, I was walking through the walks sort of every day when I was staying in King's Lynn, and walking past the fountain and walking past the Gaywood River and just thinking, this is a perfect spot to do something, some temporary installations or some outdoor workshops or, quite fun, family-friendly activities. So maybe we need to find out, opportunities to go to people rather than expect them to come to us.
Well, I've seen how Veronica and Catherine, how they operate in the gallery when people come in, and how welcoming they are to anyone and everyone who ever walks through the door. And I think that's key, really, that they listen to them and they talk and engage with them. And it doesn't matter if they've come on purpose to see the work or whether they've just seen that it's open and decided to step through the door and take a look. They meet them on their level and engage with them, and I think that's really important. For art to be an everyday thing, a thing that's available to anybody. And as for words, when you've got the right words, because it kind of vibrates with you. And I just like finding out new words and being able to say in language exactly what I mean, but also sometimes even that falls short. So I think I would always need to have a visual accompaniment to whatever I was writing or speaking, really.
Hi, just to concur with the idea about taking art out. I work a lot with wildlife trusts and doing installations like with Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust and the RSPB, and I think there's such energy and interest in doing that, working with wardens and doing installations. So I think that's a really good way of having conversations in different places and, encouraging people to see art and come back to art spaces as well, but through starting where they are.
Sorry, I was I thought you were pointing at somebody. No, I thought I saw. I've been obsessed by what you said right at the beginning, Tim, about was it Heraclitus said you can't go into the same river twice. What does that mean? Does that mean you have to seize the moment? Is it about that we have limited time? Or what is, has anyone else worked out? Or have you worked out?
Well, going back to this theme of words, I wouldn't consider myself a poet, but I do scribble stuff down. And what I find quite often is the thing that lifts me out of my daily humdrum self as it trots along in life. There's something like a sort of spike suddenly jabs into me, and I kind of wake up, and I realise that that words are starting to kind of formulate themselves almost very playfully, almost sort of like tomfooling in some way. And I just need to capture that flux but then you have to give it some form. You've got to try and so this force that through the green fuse drives the flower, that actually is present in me. I'm a portion of the, I don't know, for the better word, eternal will that drives all things, whether it be organic or inorganic. We never step twice into the same river, I think, is an acknowledgement that everything, as I say, is process. But for me, sometimes the world of process and sort of participation in things speaks to me directly. It might be a thunderstorm, or it might be just something as simple as smoke coming out of my chimney pot. But it's something that resonates. And I think that resonance is what we're cultivating artistically. So we're cultivating some sorts of resonance, and then we're amplifying that. We're noticing the correlation between ourselves and the world. Merleau-Ponty has been quoted, and he's a good place to be getting on with.
And of course, the river is never the same. We might step into the same river we think we are. We walk down to a bank, we walk in at the same place. But of course, the river's changed from moment to moment. It's never the same river.
It's a bit like Trigger's broom.
Does anyone have any further comments or questions? If not, I think we'll say thank you very much to our panel and speakers and Tim, and move on to the next break and then the next section.
Yes, so have a little break now. If you want more coffee and tea, help yourselves downstairs. I've got to sort out a tech issue with Henry, so we might be generous with this break so we can sort that out. It affects the next session.